Hello, everybody. My name is Alba Muller. My topic is Anton Schindler, erstwhile secretary to an early biographer of Beethoven. Anton Felix Schindler was born in Moravia, 20 miles north of Olomouc, in 1795, so he is 15 years younger than Beethoven. Moravia was part of the Czech lands, and they were attached to Habsburg dynasty that ruled Austria from the 1800s to the early 1900s. Eventually, they became Czechoslovakia, and then since 1993, they formed the Czech Republic. Schindler was the eldest of 12 children, and his dad, the local schoolmaster, taught him how to play the violin. He was a choir boy at the Church of St. Mary's in Olomouc. Then in 1813, he moved to Vienna to study law. He finished his studies and took his examinations in 1819. He met Beethoven around 1814, but it was very casual, and close contact only began around 1820. For about 5 years, Schindler was a clerk in different law offices, such as Beethoven's attorney, Beethoven's patron, the Archduke Rudolph. And then in 1822, he abandoned his legal career to become Concertmeister at the theater in der Josefstadt. In 1823, he became factotum for Beethoven and described himself as his private secretary. Beethoven was very busy trying to accomplish his project of selling manuscript copies of the Missa Solemnis to the courts of Europe. Then Schindler was called to help him with different tasks, such as managing his correspondence, dealing with his money, dealing with people who needed something from him, managing the publishers and the copyists, and even doing some household shopping when it was necessary. Beethoven was not very kind to Schindler, and he was often humiliating towards him. Then the Concert of Spring for 1824 was the first performance of the Ninth Symphony on part of the Missa Solemnis. That was an artistic success, but as we have discussed in class before, financially it was not successful. It was a failure. Then Beethoven accused Schindler of cheating over the receipts, and they broke up for about 2 years. Then when Beethoven became very sick, they reconnected in December 1826, and then Schindler started helping him with his affairs again until his death in March 1827. He then helped organize the funeral with his friend Brüning. And then after Beethoven's death, he appropriated many items from his apartment, including the conversation books, some manuscripts, sketchbooks, and personal items. After Beethoven's death, Anton went to visit his sister. He spent some time there. Then he came back to Vienna as a teacher, but then went to Munster to become the director of music Verein. He then in 1835 became the director of music in the city of Aachen, and he was supposed to be the ideal man to establish the correct way to perform Beethoven's symphonies, but he made enemies there, and he requested to be released from his job in 1840. During the years in Aachen, he completed the first edition of the biography and published it in 1840. After he quit his job, he spent some time in Paris and returned to Aachen, then finished a second edition in 1845. Then probably because of all his traveling and lack of job, he probably was very low on resources and decided to sell Beethoven's items that he had appropriated some years before and sold them to the Library of Berlin. He accepted a payment, like a first-time payment, and then a year payment for life. In 1846, he turned over to the Royal Library the scores, sketches, and the conversations books that Beethoven had used during the period of 1819 to 1827. He then, in 1856, moved to his last home in Bockenheim near Frankfurt, where he worked on the third edition of the biography, which he published in 1860. This was actually a complete rewrite of the first and second editions. Then, 4 years after, he died, probably of pneumonia. So what was this book that he wrote? So if you wanted to buy the third edition of Schindler's biography of Beethoven, this is how the cover would look like, and it's called Beethoven as I Knew Him. The book has 3 different parts. The first one is Beethoven's life from birth to the end of 1800s. Then the second is from the 1800s to 1814, the third from 1814 to his death. He goes on year by year describing things that were supposed to happen or happened during each of those years, musically and personally, Beethoven's life. Then after that, he adds some sections on his personality, anecdotes, individual characteristics, and then some supplements on random things such as Supplement P, Existing Personal Effects of Beethoven. So let's sample this book and see what his writing style was and how he wrote about Beethoven and how he described himself also in this book. So his first words of this edition are, "A new edition. It is generally said that second editions are the joy of the publisher and the pride of the author." The frequently described emotion of a writer so disgusted at the thought of his own completed work that for a time he does not want to see it or hear about it has come over me with a sharpness that almost completely annihilates any pleasure I might feel at finishing my task. My second sample is during the third period, remember, from 1814 to his death. And some facts they describe here about the Battle Symphony. In order to clarify what happened between these two friends, it is necessary to explain a previous incident. In 1812, Mazel had promised the composer that he would make him devices that would enable him to hear better. Hoping to spur him on, Beethoven composed a piece called Battle Symphony for the panharmonicon that Mazel had just invented. The effect of this piece was so unexpected that the mechanic urged Beethoven to orchestrate it. The composer, who had long entertained the idea of writing a long battle symphony, took his friend's advice and went to work immediately. Eventually, 4 hearing devices were produced, but only one of them, the smallest and simplest, was found to be useful. Let's see another sample of the book in Appendix 5, The Difficult Decision. And this one is one that I found very entertaining. This is the heading for the 4th movement of the last quartet in F major, Opus 135, as well as the questioning motif of the grave. Must it be? And the answering motif of the Allegro. It must be. 2 explanations of these headings are possible, but we cannot know with certainty which of them actually prompted the master's serious joke or joking seriousness. And we're going to read the first one. In Beethoven's household, the housekeeper was given money each week. It was often difficult for her to get it at the right time, for the master was not to be disturbed at his work. Old Frau Schnaps used to stand at his desk, all dressed to go to the market, and wait until a chance or perhaps an angry look would fall on her basket. Then would come the question in various tones, sometimes even sung, "Must it be?" To which the old woman would nod her head or stamp her foot and answer, "It must be." This joke was repeated almost every Saturday, and when the housekeeper had to prove with a calendar that it was payday, the master was always amused in a way that only the sly but faithful old servant could amuse him. My last sample for you guys is that supplement P we named before, and the title is Existing Personal Effects of Beethoven. Unfortunately, most of these objects were lost during his lifetime, as we have already said elsewhere. Among the effects preserved by this writer, there are a pendulum clock, a copy in Beethoven's hand of the inscription from the Temple of the Goddess Neith in Egypt, a small landscape, a brass candlestick, 2 bronze Cossacks, a little table bell, a pair of scissors, 2 seals with Beethoven's initials, 2 pairs of spectacles, a monocle, a statuette, a steel quill and a goose quill in a black case, a razor, a wax stick in bamboo, and that's the end of the list. Where are the conversation books listed? He goes on saying, "I am still undecided about the eventual resting place of this small yet interesting Beethoven collection. At any rate, it should not and will not be separated from the considerable number of existing written effects, autographs and documents, as well as books and musical scores that have already been mentioned." Schindler's biography has been very criticized. As we have observed, he was only in contact with Beethoven during the 1820s, and then for all the other years he had to rely on Beethoven's memory, and his own research was not very thorough. After the conversation books, American Beethoven's researcher Thayer examined them and then discovered several inconsistencies. Then for many scholars, the biography's main weakness is that Schindler wanted to portray himself as his personal involvement with the composer. For this edition that we're looking at, the editor had to post about 413 explanatory notes about dates, facts, and other precisions that Schindler got wrong. Some examples of those are over here. Schindler dates is in error. Schindler's memory again placed in false. Schindler crammed much misinformation into this one sentence. Schindler narrative differs in various details, and many others. A German team began publishing the conversation books in 1968, and then while doing that, they discovered that many of the entries had apparently been done after Beethoven's death. They published the forged entries in 1979. So Schindler forged about 240 entries in the conversation books. This is an example of one of the forged entries by Schindler. This team used different kinds of clues to find out which entries were forged, such as spelling changes, entries that were crowded or out of place, difference in appearance, such as the ink color or the writing tool, and slip-ups in chronology. According to German scholar Goldsmith, Schindler revised the annotations to make them clearer and perhaps to incorporate some of his own extensions on Beethoven's ideas. But we can clearly see that Schindler didn't have the ultimate respect for the document as a historical entity. We have to ask ourselves also, was he, Schindler, a professional biographer? Were the parameters of modern biography established by the time Schindler wrote Beethoven's biography? We can say modern biography had just started, and the first good example of a modern biography was published by James Boswell in 1791 on the life of Sam Johnson. He only knew him for a couple years, but he succeeded in the biography without inventing anything. I want to close my presentation with this sentence from Kayers. But possibly even more distressing is the fact that all of the events reported by Schindler in his biography are now enveloped in a shroud of uncertainty and are the subject of endless and futile debate between believers and non-believers. Thank you for your attention, and this is my list of sources. Thanks.